Hello lovelies, in this video we're going through one of our predicted essay topics for Macbeth. So we are going to plan the essay, we're going to talk you through the answer they've written, and then we're going to explain to you why this is a high level answer. So we're not just telling you this is what we think it should be, we are showing you a perfect answer as well.
In this video, I'm going to be taking you through how to put together an essay if your question was on or related to kingship. So we're going to go straight in with reading the question first, and we're going to draw a brief plan. So we'll quickly have a look at the question. Now it starts, and it always will, with a little summary at the top. It will usually be in a little box, and it says, in this case, in Act 1, Scene 4, King Duncan talks of punishing the original Thane of Cawdor, and he shows his disappointment in the treachery he has faced. So it starts off with Duncan saying, is execution done on Cawdor? Are not those in commission yet returned? Malcolm replies, my liege, they are not yet come back, but I have spoke with one that saw him die, who did report that very frankly he confessed his treasons, employed your highness's pardon, and set forth a deep repentance. Nothing in his life became him like the leaving it. He died as one that had been studied in his death to throw away the dearest thing he owed, as 'twere a careless trifle. Duncan replies, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. Enter Macbeth, Banquo, Ross and Angus. Duncan continues, O worthiest cousin, the sin of my ingratitude even now was heavy on me. Thou art so far before that swiftest wing of recompense is slow to overtake thee. Would thou hadst less deserved that the proportion both of thanks and payment might have been mine. Only I have left to say, more is thy due than more than all can pay. Macbeth says, the service and the loyalty I owe in doing it pays itself. Your highness's part is to receive our duties, and our duties are to your throne and state children and servants, which do but what they should by doing everything safe towards your love and honour. So the extract ends there. And it says as the question, starting with this speech, explore how Shakespeare presents kingship. And it'll always say something along the lines of write about how Shakespeare presents kingship in this extract or this part of the play, and then how Shakespeare presents kingship in the play overall. So looking at other examples across the play as well. So just quickly thinking about what the word kingship actually means, because I know it's been freaking out a lot of people that this question could be a possibility. Don't overcomplicate it. All that this word means is the skill or practice of ruling as a king. So it's just how kings rule. So obviously we know we've got lots of different kings in this play. We've got Duncan, we've got Macbeth, and then by the end we've got Malcolm as well. So you can just look at how they rule. And that's really important. I'll come back to that in a second. So it is important that you read the question, especially those 2 bullet points there. Yes, we know it's about kingship. You can't just use references from the extract, else you can be capped at level 2. And there are 6 levels in the mark scheme, 30 kind of divided by 6 there, so all of those different marks are spread across those 6 levels. So you want to ensure that you think of other moments from the play too, to really show your understanding of the text overall. So to make sure that you're kind of sticking by that second bullet point, my suggestion would be to focus on a moment from the beginning, middle and end, and obviously the extract is one of those. So you want to look at that little kind of summary at the top, as is from Act 1 Scene 4, so this can be our beginning paragraph. That'll go first after the introduction, and then there'll be 2 more moments after that. So because our extract is Act 1 Scene 4, we do just want to think briefly what happens before that and kind of where we are in the play generally at this point. There are, of course, 3 scenes before that, so you just want to think where we are. At this point, the witches have already seen Macbeth, so we know Macbeth has already had some dark thoughts. In this scene as well, just after this conversation that you can see on the screen, Malcolm is to be named Prince of Cumberland, and that's just the next King of Scotland. Malcolm is King Duncan's son, and this is when Macbeth has his black and deep desires, because he hears that after just hearing the witches' predictions that he's going to be king, and he has to conceal those dark thoughts that he's having. Already at this point as well, we've already heard him say, why do I yield to that suggestion? Which means he is already giving in to thoughts of King Duncan having to die so he can take his place. So last thing on this slide, We're going to look at the extract first because it will help to give me ideas of what arguments I might make. If I want to grade 7 to 9, I want to try to plan an argument. I want to do that when I'm planning so that I can write a thesis statement in my introduction that I then continue to prove throughout. If I start planning other moments first before reading this extract, I might not be able to use the extract to prove that argument, as the quotes might not help to prove my point. Now, I'm going to annotate some things here that you could use. I'm not saying that I necessarily will, but I want to show you that typically in the extracts it'll give you a few options and there's some elements that you can explore as well. So first of all, we've got Malcolm kind of reporting back to his father about whether the original Thane of Cawdor has been executed. He comments that the original Thane of Cawdor threw away the dearest thing he owed as 'twere a careless trifle. So essentially he's saying he really felt remorse, the original Thane of Cawdor did, and he recognises that he threw away his position and his honour and his nobility as though it was nothing, and he regrets that. Now, interestingly, obviously that shows the remorse of someone going against a king, but then you've also got the idea of how it can foreshadow a Macbeth's downfall as well. Kingship is not respected by either of these men, Thane of Cawdor and then soon to be Macbeth as well. And obviously Macbeth could take this as a warning, but he chooses not to. So that's something that you could focus on in terms of kingship, the fact that it's not respected by these two men. The next one I want to look at is where it says, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. So you've got the idea there that Duncan, he feels disappointed in himself for letting the Thane of Cawdor go unnoticed for what he was doing. You've got the word art there in terms of the connotations of craftsmanship and skill. The Thane of Cawdor was very skillful at hiding what he was intending to do. And then you've got the fact that he built an absolute trust in this man who has ultimately let him down. And we could explore that word absolute as well. So from this, we know that Duncan is naive. As a king, that is his weakness. He's so benevolent, he's such a wonderful king, but it blinkers him to spotting treachery. He can't spot it. And obviously we know that happens again with Macbeth as well. We could look at the theme of appearance versus reality too here, because what's on the Thane of Cawdor's face was not true to what was kind of going on inside his head as well. So we could look at that theme. Now, he calls Macbeth "O worthiest cousin" as well, building onto this idea. And that superlative "worthiest" reveals his naivety again, as we know Macbeth has already seen the witches by this point. We already know, like I say, that he's thought of yielding to that suggestion, in other words, killing the king. So it's almost a sign that even though he's disappointed about this naivety, that he was too naive to spot it the first time, it's going to happen again as well. It's foreshadowing that to the audience. So in terms of his kingship, wonderful king, well respected, yes, the rightful king, yes, but his naivety is his flaw. That's the thing that leads him to his death. Okay, so as I was annotating, it became very clear that Duncan, as a king, has a weakness. I'm going to use the extract in my argument to prove that Duncan is so benevolent, so good, so trusting, that he ultimately becomes blind to the treachery around him. Not only has he been betrayed here, showing disappointment in it, but it's also going to happen to him again, like we say. So this is where I'm going to start thinking about the order of my essay and the argument I want to build. My question's obviously about kingship, so if I'm covering Duncan here, it makes sense for me to think about the qualities of kings, good or bad. So next, if I'm doing it in order, it makes sense for me to consider Macbeth at his worst and then Malcolm reinstating order in Scotland by the end. Now, you can see there then, I've covered roughly the beginning, roughly the middle and roughly the end. This obviously doesn't have to be exact. It just shows that you know what changes throughout. Obviously, we're using this Act 1 Scene 4 extract as our beginning paragraph. Doesn't mean it has to be right from the very start in Act 1 Scene 1. So it's just a rough kind of overview of the play, shows that you know what's going on. Okay, so my argument then, if I'm going to look at these varying characteristics of kingship, I want to go down this route. By looking at both benevolent leadership and tyrannical leadership, Shakespeare reveals the kind of characteristics of both rightful and undeserving kings. So in the play, Macbeth is not a rightful king, and so his reign was never built to last, whereas Malcolm, because he's been selected as the next king by his father, he is deserving. So this kind of aligns with the beliefs in the Jacobean era in the divine right of kings. Don't forget, they believed that the king was chosen by God and this was a natural order or a natural hierarchy. So when Macbeth disrupts it, everything goes wrong. But when Malcolm takes over by the end, Scotland is well again. So therefore, Shakespeare kind of subtly shows support for rightful kings like Duncan or Malcolm, or in real life King James, at a time where King James was actually paranoid about his reign because many questioned whether it should have been his. So I need to make it clear in my introduction then that Shakespeare uses the play to show the Jacobean audience that if they'd have had an undeserving king, using Macbeth obviously as the example, there would be chaos and death like there is in the play, but good kings bring stability and natural order like King James has. So it's showing that King James is deserving. So continuing to build that argument then, we can look at paragraph 2 using Macbeth as an example. I'm going to show that he is suffering because of his tyranny, because of his regicide, and because of his hubris, or his arrogance, in other words. Because he's killed someone who should naturally be there and was chosen by God. The whole of Scotland is in turmoil, and he experiences inner turmoil too. He's upset God and is now suffering psychologically, essentially, is what I'm saying. So the quote, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife," is what I'm going to use. You can explore the metaphor full of scorpions, thinking about what we know about scorpions in a literal sense and what this says metaphorically about Macbeth. For me, I'm going to go down the route that scorpions can paralyse people. And to link that metaphorically, I'm going to say Macbeth's mind is poisoned with corruption and therefore paralysed with fears of losing the crown. So that's what that metaphor kind of suggests. I might look at that word "oh" to connote his desperation as he clings to something that isn't rightfully his. Essentially, his kingship is built on deception and illegitimacy. It's not his, and that's why he's suffering. And that's going to help me build my argument once again that Shakespeare uses the play to support James and show that rightful kings bring stability in their reign, and of course Macbeth hasn't. Finally, looking more towards the end of the play, I want to highlight that the end of the play brings about stability in Scotland because Malcolm should be the king because he was chosen. So it mirrors the stability that King James brings to England. That's what Shakespeare wants to show, that King James brings stability as Malcolm does. And when Malcolm takes the crown, he says that Scotland will be planted newly, suggesting death and decay under Macbeth's reign, but vitality and growth under Malcolm's reign. After the brutal tyranny of Macbeth's reign, it's useful that Shakespeare ends with this peaceful but sombre conclusion, this idea that everything is well again, because it's used to remind the audience that that is what they have now in King James as a rightful king, just like Malcolm in the play. It's almost a very clever way of saying be grateful for what you have. It's a reminder to the audience. Okay, so I have my plan. Let's have a read of the essay to show you how it's all come together, and then we'll have a look at how it's meeting the assessment objectives. In Shakespeare's play Macbeth, the theme of kingship, defined as the practice of ruling as a king, is explored through the varying portrayals of rulership embodied by King Duncan, Macbeth and Malcolm. Through Duncan's benevolent leadership, Macbeth's tyrannical usurpation, and Malcolm's restoration of order, Shakespeare examines the complexities and consequences of kingship, revealing the characteristics of rightful and undeserving kings. These insights into kingship align with the prevailing beliefs of the divine right of kings during King James's reign, subtly showing support for the legitimacy of his rule during a period of political uncertainty. In the provided extract from Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth, Shakespeare initially presents King Duncan as a figure embodying the virtues of benevolent kingship, though these qualities blinker him to the treachery around him. For example, Duncan's trust in his subjects is evident in his remark that the Thane of Cawdor was a gentleman on whom he built an absolute trust. Here, the word absolute emphasises the unwavering trust Duncan places in those he deems worthy, reflecting his noble and trusting nature. However, this trust ultimately proves to be his downfall, as he extends it to Macbeth, the new Thane of Cawdor, who harbours treacherous intentions to commit regicide. Duncan's naivety in judging the original Thane of Cawdor's character, highlighted by the metaphor of having no art to see the mind's construction in the face, further exposes his vulnerability to betrayal. Specifically, art implies craftsmanship and skill, which by his own admission he lacks when it comes to recognising treachery and duplicity. This theme of appearance versus reality is significant throughout the play, as characters often hide their true intentions behind a facade of loyalty or nobility. Perhaps then Shakespeare presented King Duncan in this way to highlight the tragedy of betrayal, reminiscent of the betrayal experienced by King James during the Gunpowder Plot, urging his audience to recognise the callousness of duplicity towards such a noble and rightful king. In stark contrast to Duncan's noble kingship, Shakespeare portrays Macbeth as a tyrant consumed by ambition and paranoia. Macbeth claims, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife," in Act 3, Scene 2, in an ambiguous conversation as he conceals his murderous intentions against Banquo and Fleance. This remark encapsulates Macbeth's tortured psyche, revealing the mental anguish he experiences as a consequence of his transgressions. Shakespeare's deliberate use of the imagery of scorpions conjures ideas of infestation, poison, and paralysis. It ultimately suggests that Macbeth's mind is poisoned with corruption and paralysed with fears of losing the crown, symbolising the moral decay and instability brought about by his ruthless pursuit of power. Further to this, the use of "oh" and the exclamatory sentence magnifies his desperation as he continues to hubristically cling to his reign despite its illegitimacy. This portrayal of Macbeth serves as a didactic morality play for Jacobean audiences, warning against the perils of regicide and the violation of the divine right. Through Macbeth's tragic downfall, Shakespeare underscores the inherent instability and chaos that results from the usurpation of natural order. By the play's conclusion, following turbulent battles against the tyrant Macbeth, order is restored to Scotland with Malcolm's ascension to the throne. His proclamation that Scotland will be planted newly symbolises a fresh beginning for the country, freed from the snares of watchful tyranny under Macbeth's rule. Shakespeare's choice of imagery, particularly the metaphor of planting, conveys the idea of growth and renewal, reflecting the hope for a brighter future under Malcolm's reign. Interestingly, this imagery heavily juxtaposes the turmoil brought about by Duncan's death when dark night strangled the travelling lamp. The notion that light had been strangled denotes brutality and death and becomes symbolic of the loss of hope within Scotland, whilst here we are presented with the imagery of new life. Ultimately, as the rightful heir to the throne, Malcolm, the Prince of Cumberland, embodies the divine right of kings, ensuring the reinstatement of the natural order once more. It is difficult to argue that Shakespeare uses this message to resonate strongly with his contemporaries, reinforcing the importance of upholding traditional hierarchical structures and the sanctity of legitimate rule, therefore showing support for King James as rightful despite political concerns of the era. To conclude, in Macbeth, Shakespeare juxtaposes the contrasting portrayals of kingship to convey important moral lessons to his audience. Through Duncan's naivety, Macbeth's tyranny, and Malcolm's restoration of order, Shakespeare explores themes of morality, greed, and the consequences of transgressing the natural order. Fundamentally, the play serves as a cautionary tale, urging audiences to heed the dangers of ambition and the importance of maintaining rightful authority. In aligning with the political sentiments of King James, Shakespeare reinforces the idea of the divine right and the inherent legitimacy of the monarchy. Okay, so I'm going to point out some features that adhere to the assessment objectives and kind of how they do, just so you can see how it's hitting those top bands. Now, just to be clear, at the very top, if you're looking at level 4, level 5 or level 6, it goes from level 4 being clear, level 5 being a lot more thoughtful, a lot more kind of considered, really, really kind of deep analysis, considering purpose. And then right at the very top, it's considered to be really, really critical. So there's a concept, there's an argument being built, and it continues to prove that by the end as well. So I want to show you how it does that. Now, AO1 is all about the explanations that you're providing, the links back to the texts, the kind of quotations that you're using, and the fact that they're carefully selected and so on. And you're considering, for anything above level 2, the whole text. So anything above 10 marks, you're considering the whole text. AO2 is all about the analysis of writers' methods, using subject terminology judiciously, that means really carefully, and precisely, and then thinking about how the writer's methods actually create meaning. And when you're looking at those higher levels, level 5 and level 6, it's not just about saying this simile creates this image inside the text, it's how that method, as simile is an example, creates an image for readers outside of the text. So you step outside of the text, you think of it as something that's supposed to teach a lesson or provide something to readers or audiences. There's a purpose behind it, and your methods connect to that. They don't just stay inside and show what it means to a character or what it says about a character. It goes further than that. So if you look at my introduction, then you can see that the word kingship is introduced immediately, and there's a brief definition as well, just to show you know your stuff. You don't need to do that with every single word. Some of them are a lot more simple than that. I just kind of slot it in there just to show I know what I'm talking about. You wouldn't need to do that with something like guilt. We all know what guilt means. But it's only an embedded clause as well. I've kept it very, very short anyway, so don't feel the need to. But the question is addressed, and that's really important. Then you've got the idea that rulership is embodied through Duncan, Macbeth and Malcolm, so that kind of hints at who I'm going to be talking about. It'd be pointless me saying that if I was then not going to refer back to Macbeth or Malcolm or Duncan, for example. So I'm kind of setting out who I'm going to be exploring as well. That's really good for AO1 because we're talking about the text, we're referencing the text, and we're showing what we know about the text. And then we go a little bit further with that. Duncan's leadership, Macbeth's tyrannical usurpation, and then Malcolm's restoration of order as well. So I'm going a little bit further, hinting a little bit more about what I'm going to be talking about. Again, that's AO1. And then in those last 2 sentences there, that's almost where my argument is addressed and introduced. Got the idea that Shakespeare examines the complexities of kingship, revealing the characteristics of rightful and undeserving kings, and how this aligns with things going on at the time. So we've got purpose inside the text and then outside the text, which is what I was just speaking about. You've got AO3 addressed because there's some contextual consideration. Obviously, that's not enough on its own. We then have to go on to prove it. Now, because I've introduced that argument, obviously in the first paragraph, it's really important I continue to go back to it if I want those grades 7 to 9. That's that concept idea that I was talking about for level 6. It's pointless saying it if I'm then not going to refer back to it at all. That's the point of an introduction. You're introducing your big idea and then serving to prove it in finer detail later on. So if we look at the first paragraph about Duncan. Now, in the opening sort of paragraph of analysis, we've got that point that Shakespeare initially presents King Duncan as a figure embodying benevolent kingship, but that blinkers him. So that's very, very clear. So we're going to put that as AO1 level 4. That's clear, really clear point. But obviously, again, we've got some work to do in terms of proving that. So let's see how it continues. We've got the analysis of the word absolute and then the analysis of the idea of art as well, implying craftsmanship and skill. And it's really beautifully put and very thoughtful to say that by his own admission, by King Duncan's own admission, he lacks the skill at recognising treachery and duplicity. So that's a really thoughtful comment. We can put that as level 5. And then again, it really thoughtfully rounds all of that up at the end with that perhaps sentence. Perhaps Shakespeare presented Duncan in this way to highlight the tragedy of betrayal, reminiscent of the betrayal experienced by King James. So I would put that at level 5 still, because it's not really, really explicitly obvious that we're linking back to that argument we set out in the first paragraph in that introduction. It's a very, very thoughtful comment to make, that it's getting the audience to consider the callousness or the cruelty of being duplicitous towards a noble and rightful king. It may have just helped to make it really, really clear and say something along the lines of, therefore showing support for King James once again, just on the end of that sentence. Next up, we've got our paragraph on Macbeth. And of course, like I said in my plan, I wanted to be talking about his kind of psychological turmoil because of his transgression. So he is suffering the consequences because he has disrupted the great chain of being by killing a king. So we're using that quote, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind," and we're saying that his kingship is in stark contrast to Duncan's noble kingship. And now again, we're addressing that question. So we've got the analysis exploring the idea of scorpions conjuring ideas of infestation, poison and paralysis, suggesting Macbeth is poisoned with corruption, he's paralysed with fears of losing the crown, and it symbolises his moral decay because of his pursuit of power. And then we go further with the use of "oh," so we're not just kind of picking one part from that quotation. Sometimes there will only be one thing to choose. We've got more there that we've kind of analysed. We're picking quotations carefully. That's judicious, don't forget. So we pick things we know we can say lots about. And we've gone for that word "oh" and how it magnifies his desperation as he continues to cling to his power, even though it's not actually rightfully his. And again, we're linking to that idea of rightful and undeserving kings. And then finally, we've got that idea of Macbeth serving as a didactic morality tale for Jacobean audiences, and it's warning against the perils of regicide. And through his downfall, Shakespeare shows the inherent instability and chaos that result from the usurpation of natural order. So again, the concept is kind of being alluded to. That argument that the play is being used to show support for King James as a rightful leader. Punishment will occur for people that aren't rightful, like Macbeth. Probably just needs to be a little bit more explicit again, but we're building to that level 6. So let's have a look at how the final paragraph kind of fares as well. Now in this final paragraph, it's really, really clever how it introduces Malcolm as a person who has taken over following turbulent battles against the tyrant Macbeth. You've got a sneaky little quotation embedded there, and you've got the idea that order is restored to Scotland with Malcolm's ascension to the throne. And obviously the quotation then goes on to prove that. So we've got some level 6 AO1 there in terms of the concept of stability as per the divine right of kings being referred to again. Everything is in order as it should be because Malcolm is now king. And then again, it's just about going on to prove that with the evidence that we've got. We've got the evidence of the idea that Scotland is planted newly and it's freed from the snares of watchful tyranny. And the AO2 here, the language analysis and the method analysis, is really, really carefully considered. It's more critical than the previous paragraphs. We've got terminology and quotations used judiciously, and that's carefully selected, being really picky with them, really, really juicy ones, and exploring how those methods create meaning as well. So we've got the idea that Shakespeare's choice of imagery, particularly the metaphor of planting, conveys the idea of growth and renewal, that idea of hope for a brighter future, and how it juxtaposes with what happened to Scotland after Duncan's death. Now, there are a few things. Horses eat each other, an owl attacks and kills a falcon, and here, the one I've used, dark night strangles the travelling lamb, which just means it was so dark that even though it's daytime, no one can see the sun. It goes on to explore the symbolic loss of hope in comparison. So where we've got this idea of a new beginning for the country with Malcolm, when Macbeth killed Duncan, there was this loss of hope and obviously this clear, immediate turmoil with the transgression of the great chain of being. And now this is where it's really clearly going back to the argument set out in the introduction, and this is where we've got that level 6 AO3. The bit where it talks about Malcolm and how he embodies the divine right of kings, and there is natural order reinstated with his ascension to the throne. And then there where it says it's difficult to argue that Shakespeare uses this message clearly to resonate with his contemporaries, reinforcing the idea that we should have hierarchy, It reinforces the idea of the importance of legitimate rule, and it therefore shows support for King James as rightful, even though he was anxious about his position. So that final paragraph is where it really solidifies that level 6 response, hitting that top mark band. And then just in that conclusion, it rounds it all up. It refers back to that argument, exploring the ways that Shakespeare does it overall. He juxtaposes the contrasting portrayals of kingship through Duncan and Malcolm to Macbeth, ultimately serving as a tale that encourages audiences to heed the dangers of ambition, and in aligning with the political sentiments of King James, he reinforces the idea of the divine right and the inherent legitimacy of the monarchy. So that conclusion brings it all together and just shows the examiner that I have considered my argument right from the very start. I've considered all the characters I was going to mention right from the very start, and the idea that King James needed support and Shakespeare was showing him that support through these varying portrayals.
Ouch! This is why in some videos I explain scratches.